Another part of this huge temple, Don.
Yes, this, in fact, is the Holy of Holies.
That's really dramatic, isn't it?
Oh, it is. It's fantastic. It was the latest item to be added to the temple, and it is a great enclosed court with an indirect access so that you can't see directly into it.
So they wanted to keep it secret?
That's right, yes. In which there were 4 of these gigantic shrines. 3 of them were destroyed and have collapsed. The fragments still remain. Only one survives. Even that, an attempt was made to destroy, yes, but they were not successful, so it still stands, and it's the largest monument north of the pyramids in Egypt.
It's really dramatic, especially from down here, and there were 4 of those.
There were 4, yes.
Each with a god inside?
That's right, each a form of the ram god.
The ram god was held in great esteem by the citizens of Mendes. It was a symbol of potency and strength, which would ensure a robust prosperity for the city's inhabitants.
So this would have been the center of life for the whole town?
Yes, it was, in a sense, the focal point of the entire community. Everyone would have considered himself a devotee at various levels of the ram god. That was his god, his town god.
So this temple was at the center of a great city. How long did all this last?
Well, over, what, 5,000 years, I suppose. But we could have still seen this temple essentially standing in the Middle Ages. It was only after that that it was demolished for the stone, for the limestone in particular. And through the depredations of early archaeologists who were treasure hunters, the whole thing collapsed.
Birds nest in this place now. But 2,500 years ago, a god lived here. And after the dark night of Mendes' unexplained tragedy in the Old Kingdom, he again smiled on this ancient town. Mendes' greatest years were from 600 to 330 BC. The remains of the city's great walls overlook what was an active port on the river. Merchant ships from as far away as Greece brought their cargoes here to Mendes' busy harbor. Timber and precious oils were traded for Egyptian grain, gold, and wine. Today, the route of the Nile has shifted far away from this place. The once bustling harbor is now little more than scrub brush and sand. Donald Redford and I walked atop the ancient city walls, and he gave me a sense of the great port that once thrived on this spot.
In the middle background, where the line of trees is, you would have seen the river, the Mendesian branch of the Nile. But in the foreground here, you would have had the harbor coming in, a great triangular-shaped harbor.
So this was a real center of trade.
Oh, very much so, yes. There is no docks, as far as we can say. We found one anchor, by the way, in the excavations, which virtually proves that it is a harbor. And the ships would have been beached, a mooring stake would have been driven in, and then a gangplank laid down, and the porters would have come with their bales and whatnot. Egypt had so much to offer. It was filthy rich with resources that it acted like a great magnet on the peoples of the world. Everybody wanted to come here. Everybody wanted to trade. It was worth your while to even build a ship and go into partnership with a neighboring big man, if you were a Phoenician, and send it down here to Egypt. You would make a fortune.
In addition to the ancient harbor, Donald is also trying to learn more about where people lived here at Mendes.
Yes.
Over here on this side, that is the remains of the town itself?
That's the town. In fact, at this point, you see, you have prime land because it collects the north wind. It has a marvelous location. And so that it was occupied by major public buildings, maybe the house of the governor or whoever was in charge. If one were to excavate, and we have partly excavated over there, you would find great enclosures with rather well-built buildings housing the scribes and the elite of the community. In fact, you can see as we look that there are eroded walls still in place. And these could be plotted, and then we'd have a much better idea of these great public buildings. I would love to get out there, and that is on the agenda, if I last that long.
What strikes me standing here is first of all, that you have an entire city that you're digging. It's huge. You have temples, you have not one but 2 harbors. You have an entire town there that's been virtually unexcavated.
Right.
And it is also quite the most beautiful place, isn't it?
Oh, it is. It's very striking.
Life in Mendes was uniquely cosmopolitan. But in other ways, life here would have been very similar to that in most cities of ancient Egypt.
We do have an idea of what it was like to live in an Egyptian city. And they were quite congested. They didn't have broad avenues generally. They had networks of rather narrow streets, rather irregularly laid out. And the houses were nested together so that you had the large houses of elite individuals surrounded by the houses of people of much lower status.
About the only important resource that Egypt lacked was good timber. The wealthy could purchase lumber from faraway Phoenicia, which is today Lebanon. The poor made do with the trunks of palm trees. Just as in the Egypt of today, shortage of lumber in ancient times was solved by building most houses from mud bricks. The thick bricks made houses which were cool and quite comfortable.
I think from what we see in the arrangement of the houses and the layout and the scenes that they show generally depict that they were very clean and that they were maintained very well and also decorated nicely and often painted.
But Egyptian tidiness and pride in their homes did not seem to extend to the streets outside their front doors.
Sanitation was virtually non-existent, even in the houses of the elite. There's no such thing as running water or drainage or anything like that. And we know that the rubbish dumps that built up over time from the continual cleaning of the house and the discarding of waste and so forth, they were quite careful about keeping their houses clean, but the rubbish dump was right around the corner. You dumped around the back of your house.
Like the rest of their countrymen, citizens of Mendes were probably quite gregarious, congregating near the temples and marketplaces to visit their neighbours and hear the news of the day. It was in these social settings that we would have been able to see how much Egyptians cared about their personal appearance.
The Egyptians, like people today, were also very keen on how they looked. And I mean, image, I won't say was everything, but it certainly played a large part. So the Egyptians spent quite a lot of time, it appears, on adorning themselves.
The fabric of choice for virtually all Egyptian clothing was linen, made from the fibre of flax plants. Although Egypt is today famous for cotton, it wasn't grown in ancient times. It was a linen that filled Egypt's looms and was spun into a variety of clothing for the king and his subjects. For the peasant, dress was little more than a loincloth. But for wealthy Egyptians, linen was amazingly versatile and could be fashioned into everything from beautifully pleated skirts to delicately thin shawls.
If we look at the art of the ancient Egyptians, we would think that the Egyptians usually walked around in rather skimpy clothing, enjoying a very balmy climate. And I'm sure in the summer and the spring in Egypt, they did dress very lightly. But in Egypt, the winters are actually very cold. And we can be sure, and there are actually textual references to this, that people would wear quite heavy clothing, you know, robes and long garments to protect themselves from the cold.
Records found in the ruins of one village also show that long before the first boutique, Egyptian women had a sense of fashion and vanity.
I do think that the ancient Egyptian women were conscious of their dress, and one of the quotes we have coming up several times is women complaining that they don't have a thing to wear. And they obviously had something to wear, but it wasn't good enough.
Although many working-class Egyptians spent their days barefoot, getting around Egypt involves walking over a lot of sharp rocks and hot sand. Sandals were popular. The wealthy could afford to have theirs made of leather. The poor accepted straw footwear. Jewellery, even for the poor, was an important part of the image Egyptians wished to present. But no part of grooming and personal style had greater importance than makeup. As an actor, I couldn't resist seeing how I would look as an Egyptian.
Makeup itself probably started as a sort of protection against the sun. Both sexes used it, and most classes of people, from the peasant to the king, wouldn't be caught without it, even during the workday. Eye makeup had several purposes. It kept infection and flies away, and it was believed to have magical properties. It also reduced the glare of the sun, rather like ball players who wear black streaks under their eyes. Red ochre was ground up to create a sort of rouge for the cheeks, and it was also mixed with oil and fat to create what we would call lipstick. The Egyptian medicine chest had various deodorants, depilatories, even anti-wrinkle cream. Oh yes, most Egyptians shaved their heads, and quite right too. Bald is beautiful. It also keeps the lice away. But you wouldn't want the sun beating down on your head all day, so all classes of Egyptians wore wigs. The poor made theirs out of vegetable fibre. The rich could afford real hair, which means they probably had real bad hair days. Right, that's it. How do I look? Ready for a day of work or a night out in Memphis or Thebes? No, perhaps not quite ready.
In ancient Egypt, how people lived was often influenced by where they lived. Some settlements began near harbours, others at the intersection of trade routes, still others at strategically important spots along the Nile. But much of what we know about urban life in Egypt comes from the remains of a unique town, which existed wholly to support cemeteries. Those cemeteries were the legendary tombs in the Valley of the Kings and the Valley of the Queens. They were located on the west bank of the Nile, across from the great religious center of Thebes. We're in the entrance corridor of one of the many tombs in the Valley of the Kings. Each one of these great spaces had to be carved out of solid rock, and it required the labor of hundreds of men. Some dug and carried the rock, some drew and carved the reliefs into the limestone, still others painted the amazing scenes we see around us. To provide housing for this valuable and skilled workforce, a special village was created. This workman's village is today called Deir el-Medina, Arabic for Monastery of the Town. Beginning in 1500 BC, this desolate spot was home to the artisans who created the grand tombs for Egypt's nobility. The spot selected for the settlement was anything but ideal. The relentless Egyptian sun scorches the site, and there are no trees or water. There isn't even a view of the Nile, flowing less than 2 miles away. But the location of Deir el-Medina had one thing going for it. It was only a short walk to the work going on in the valley tombs.
People who worked on temples would have moved from one site to another right after that temple was constructed. But the Valley of the Kings was maintained for a long time, so the people who were working there maintained these jobs in their families and maintained the relationships, and we have such a full record of what went on there.
Archaeologists who found Deir el-Medina were fortunate to also discover an ancient rubbish dump filled with priceless information.
We're very lucky that they left behind their scratch paper, and that is basically this. This is what we call in the Egyptology trade an ostracon. It could be either a shard of limestone like you see here, or it could be a potsherd, broken pottery, and this was basically just a medium on which you wrote in ink, which is made out of lampblack and water. Fortunately, we found quite a cache of these things.
These small chips of stone are the remnants of records, diaries, and informal notes which give us a priceless glimpse into the lives of the Egyptians who lived in this place. No other city in ancient Egypt is so well documented.